Okay, your project for this next 2 weeks, due on March 21, is the sculptural print. It's based on the artwork of a printmaker named Sam Vernon. We'll talk a little bit more about her. But the basic idea is that you're going to make a print and then you're going to make a three-dimensional form out of the print. So here's one of Sam Vernon's installation. You can see all the really intricate printmaking that she does. I'm going to include a video in the email with this presentation that has her talking about a big installation that she made and how she kind of comes up with the imagery for her work. But the easiest way to describe how to turn your print into a sculpture is using one of these methods. And I'm going to talk about them one by one. A mobile, a stabile, and paper mache. I'm going to this is just the very most, in case you're having trouble about thinking, how do I turn a print into a sculpture? Maybe this will help sort of like give you some ideas. A stabile, we'll talk about this one first. A stabile would basically be, you make your print and then you cut the paper in such a way that the print could stand on its own, either by standing on the floor like this one does, or you could think of this also as something that you pin to the wall and then it comes off the wall. Now the Bristol board in your kit is thick enough where you can cut it apart like this and make it stand on its own, but also you could adhere it to something else. So this print is a 3-color reduction linoleum print that is actually adhered to a little piece of chipboard. But the Bristol in your kit would actually be able to do this on its own without being adhered to anything. So that's sort of the easiest way that I can think of to make a print into a three-dimensional form. Cut it, fold it, and make it sort of come off the ground or off the floor. Another way that you could think about making your print into a three-dimensional form would be making a mobile out of it. And so with that, you would cut your print into multiple parts. Then you would hang it from a wire armature. And I'm going to give you a little demo about this next week about how a really easy way to make a wire sort of frame to hang little bits of paper, little sculptures from, to make it into a mobile. I didn't get far enough back to take a picture of this very well, but basically, you can see there's a little piece of monofilament that's holding the print to the wire form, and then it's sort of hanging in space. And I'll give a little demo about how to make a really simple, cool way to make a mobile next week. The third way that you could think about turning your print into a sculpture is with paper mache. With that method, you would basically make a form out of cardboard or some kind of structure like this. This is just really simply kind of folded cardboard taped together. Then you would take your print, you would cut it into strips, and you would paper mache it onto the form. The paper mache is just made with, flour and water, and I'm basically gluing the print onto the form. So that would be, I don't have a picture of this one done, but you can imagine it's basically the exact same print as these other, the stabile and the mobile, but in the third one, I've actually adhered the print to the form. So in most of the ideas that you guys have had so far probably are combinations of some of these methods. You don't have to stick to exactly one of these ideas, but they're just sort of ideas if you're having trouble thinking about how to turn this thing into a three-dimensional object. Those are just some ideas about how to do it. For most of you, your project will be sort of a combination or fall kind of in between one of those things. One of the artists that I want to look at is Jung Hong. And she's an artist that uses, I would say this is a mix between the mobile, which is hanging from the ceiling, and almost like the paper mache where the print is glued to the surface of something. These structures are made with like chicken wire. There's also some paper mache involved, but then Jung silk screens she actually silk screens on plastic bags and then sews the plastic bags like a skin onto this form. So in a way, it's similar to the paper mache form because the print is adhered to an existing structure, but in this case, it's not necessarily paper mache, it's actually sewn together. I mean, this is a very involved sculpture that took months and months to make. You can imagine her sewing all of those little things together, but this is just to give you an idea of the idea that some projects might not fall exactly into these categories. And we'll look a little bit more at Jung Hong's work in a minute. This is another sculpture by Sam Vernon, the artist that we looked at in the beginning. And this, again, I would say that this falls most closely in that stabile form where you're cutting the paper and the paper itself is providing the structure of the sculptural form. But you can see here that it's many, many prints sort of wound together and built up into this form. It also uses the wall as part of the structure. So you can imagine if it wasn't partially pinned to the wall, this sculpture would fall down. So you can also think about the wall as part of the sculpture, part of the structure of your print. We're going to look, so Sam Vernon is one of the artists we're going to look at for inspiration. And I have a little video that's linked in this same email of Sam talking about this installation at the Seattle Art Museum. Now, Sam's installations are not exclusively printmaking. She also uses a lot of copy paper, just like making printouts from the computer or printouts from a copy machine, and she draws back into those. But they're always based on relief prints or etchings. So she starts out with a print, and then she starts to add to it, to copy it, to draw back on top of it. And this installation I'm including because because we see Sam talking about it a little bit later. It is a sculptural installation. If you see that big black fabric to the right, she uses a lot of these big draperies so that the piece itself is sculptural, but this isn't one of the most sculptural installations. It's mostly this huge sort of wall mural. But this is also the work of Sam Vernon. And I wanted to include her because she's just such a great, thinking about the multiple, thinking about using many, many prints and kind of building this three-dimensional space with those prints. This is another installation by Sam Vernon. The thing on the wall is slightly three-dimensional, but also she makes these big hanging, that sort of newspaper-looking thing, the scrim that's hanging in front of it is also part of the sculptural installation. I wanted to show you this artist, Belkis Ayan. She's a great, great artist, and I have another video of Belkis in the printmaking studio that's attached to this email as well. Now, Belkis, although she has in some exhibitions, some of her prints come off the wall. They're on these big plinths and they're in these big sort of triangular forms. The reason I'm showing you Belkis is because Sam Vernon references Belkis Ayan when she talks about her work. And Belkis Ayan is another really great printmaker. Not necessarily sculptural, but Belkis's work relates to that idea of pattern and disguise that I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. The pattern and disguise is the theme that I want you to think about for this assignment. So the first idea really that I think is like most salient about these is the pattern in them. She uses all of these really complex patterns, all of these really complex sort of natural, almost as though the figures are sort of melting into the background, but also the iconography is like many Caribbean religions. It does a lot of work about the Abu Kwan myth of Princess Sakan, which is a story about this princess in this sort of Cuban religious myth, where the princess discovers this magical fish, and her father tells her that she must never speak of the fish. It's like granting her too much power. And so you'll see in all the imagery that she uses, the figures has no mouth because it's not allowed to speak. And to her, I think to Belkis, it was sort of like a metaphor for like being female, maybe being in this sort of repressive society. But the thing that I think is kind of relates to our theme of pattern in disguise is because a lot of the times the religious iconography looks Christian because, this was a country that was colonized by Christian Europeans. And so she had to fit the Abu Kwan religious sect, all the myths that she believed in, she had to fit that into the Catholic iconography. So it looks like at first glance there's crosses, there's people that look like they're praying, but to her it also has these myths of this African princess that's like hidden inside of this. So anyway, I thought that she's just a great printmaker. I included a video of her actually making a collagraph inside the email, and it's just really incredible to watch her work on these massive collagraphs. So the other artist that's an inspiration for us, I showed you one of her pieces, is Jung Hong or Jung Il Hong, and she did that piece where the silk screens are sort of adhered to this large form. There was this really beautiful piece at the RISD Museum in the early aughts, so 2000s. And she made this massive sculpture that was like maybe 20 feet tall, that thing in the background, all silk screened on plastic bags and then formed around this armature. And this one, and the figure in the front are lit from the inside. And so the way that I think Jung relates to that idea of pattern and disguise is that she's using these really complex organic patterns to kind of like, well, in the form, you can actually walk inside of that form, and you're sort of hidden in there. But also she's using the pattern in kind of these costumes that mimic the way that a natural plant or an animal will disguise itself. Jung also she's a really great printmaker. She's a really great silkscreen printmaker specifically. And I think based on those sculptures that she was doing where she was making multiple prints and then collaging them into these sculptures, she also makes these huge silkscreens that are made out of collage. So I know, almost similar to the project that we did last semester. She'll make a silkscreen, like you can see that bird image that's kind of showing up repeatedly. That's just one print, sort of an addition featuring that bird, and then she cuts it up and collages it into these large forms. She also does multiple color silk screens that aren't collaged, that are just, just one image. And these are many color silk screens. So you guys have, you know how hard it is to burn the screen and get the registration right and all the things that you guys studied last semester. You can imagine her silk screens I can count maybe 5 or 6 colors in this silk screen. So you can imagine like the amount of work that goes into them. These are quite big too. This is maybe 45 inches tall. Okay, now I want to show you guys your assignment sheet. And all of this is on Blackboard, but I just wanted to sort of walk you through the assignment sheet. And then hang with me for like another 1 minute, because I'm also going to tell you guys what your homework is. So we talked about the next assignment. You're going to make a print and then turn it into a sculpture. I'm going to show you in class next week about how to make that mobile, and we'll also talk a little bit more about the stay-bile and the papier-mâché. You can use any kind of print for this sculpture. You can make a monoprint, a collagraph, a relief print, that can be linoleum or woodblock. You can make an etching, or you can make a silk screen. So any of the kinds of printmaking that we've studied so far, you can turn that into the sculpture. Here are the technical requirements. You have to make more than one print. That has to go into your sculpture. Your sculpture has to be ambitious in scale or in number. So if you tell me that there's no size requirement for your sculpture, but if you tell me that you want to make it, 2 inches tall, I might say, well, why don't you add to that by making many of them? Like if I was thinking about making that tree sculpture that I showed at the very beginning, if you were going to present to me, I want to make this freestanding tree sculpture, I might say, well, why don't you make a small forest of trees? And that might sort of increase the scale of the scale and number of your project. There's no material requirements. You can use any method of printmaking. You can use any of your paper. But when I was planning your kit this semester, I intended to use that Bristol pad. That's the sort of thick pad of paper in your kit. And the reason is that you can actually cut that and it will stand. It will sort of support itself on its own. It's thick enough. Your print should the print itself should be the defining characteristic of your piece. So for instance, if you said, I want to silk screen a face on the side of my, a desk or something, I would say, well, I want the print to be the biggest feature. I don't want the object that it's printed on to sort of take away from the print. All the prints that I showed you are, the print is sort of forward in the sculpture. The print is the most salient characteristic. We can talk about that more in class as well. The conceptual points, I just want you to be able to describe the idea about it. I always like people to talk about how their idea changed as they were working on it. And then also you should be able to address the idea of how it connects to the theme of pattern and disguise. So next week, we're going to work in class all day. I would say next week is a good day to be working on your print. And then next week is a good day to work on the sculpture. And then the critique is on March 21. So you have 2 big work days between now and the critique. And that brings us to what I want to tell you about your homework. As I said, pattern and disguise, those are our 2 artists. This is what I want you to do for your homework. You have to send me an email with your plan for these 3 things. I want to know the type of print you're going to make, the number of prints that you're going to make, and the sculptural form that is going to take. A mobile, a stabile, a paper mache. And then you could also describe it in a few words, especially if it doesn't fit into that category. But really your email to me just has to be, 3 words: type of print, number of prints, and sculptural form. You don't even have to say hi Marie or say your name, your name will be in your email. But basically that is the homework that I want you to do before Monday's class. Because when you come in Monday, I want you to start working on your print. If I see, I probably won't have a chance to write back to every single person, but I will have checked just to make sure that you emailed me type of print, number of prints, and sculptural form. If I see a big problem with it, I'll email you back. But if you don't hear back from me, that just means, yes, go ahead. Like, that sounds great. Start working on it. Of course, email me if you have any questions. And just send me an email over the weekend that says those 3 things, and be ready to start working on your print on Monday. And I'll see you soon.